In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Los Angeles was at the heart of America's growing rock and roll revolution. Young people were buying records, tuning into radio stations like KRLA and KFWB, and packing local clubs to hear the new sound that made parents nervous. Rock wasn't just music, it was energy, rebellion, and identity for a generation that wanted something different from their parents' slow crooners and Hollywood show tunes. But while teenagers were dancing in their bedrooms and piling into cars for concerts, a very different group of people in Los Angeles was paying attention. Local politicians, church leaders, and police departments looked at the rise of rock and saw something dangerous. They didn't just dislike it, they tried to censor it. The fear of rock and roll wasn't new to Los Angeles. It had been bubbling up nationwide. Across the country, city councils debated banning concerts, radio stations were pressured to drop certain songs, and politicians warned that rock was corrupting America's youth. But Los Angeles had a special place in that fight because it was both a media capital and a city where so many musicians lived and worked. If rock could be controlled in LA, its influence across the country could be slowed. At least that's what the politicians thought. One of the earliest battles came from the way rock concerts were policed. In 1958, after a show at the Shrine Auditorium by rock and roll acts like Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson ended in scuffles, LA officials started insisting that concerts be heavily supervised. Permits became harder to get. Promoters had to promise extra security and accept police in the aisles watching the crowds. Politicians claimed they were protecting public safety. Fans knew it was really about controlling a culture they didn't understand. When teens rushed the stage or screamed at their idols, city leaders saw not excitement but chaos, something they wanted to shut down. By the early 1960s, the Los Angeles Police Department was running undercover operations in clubs and teen hangouts. They claimed they were looking for drugs and delinquency, but their focus often landed on the music itself. Songs with suggestive lyrics were reported up the chain. DJs who spun too much rhythm and blues were warned that their licenses could be questioned. Some stations even received letters from city officials hinting that if they didn't tone things down, advertisers would be pressured to pull support. It wasn't just about order, it was about shaping what kids were allowed to hear. At the same time, city council members and county supervisors leaned on a familiar argument: morality. They gave speeches about how rock lyrics encouraged lust, rebellion, and disrespect for authority. They connected rock to gang activity, even when there was no evidence. Some politicians openly said the music was too Negro in its rhythm and influence, thinly veiling their racism in language about decency. The goal wasn't just to censor songs, it was to keep cultures separate, to stop the blending of black rhythm and white youth culture that rock embodied. One of the flashpoints came in 1964, when the British invasion brought acts like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to American shores. Los Angeles was one of the first cities to host their concerts, and the frenzy around those shows sent local leaders into panic. Politicians described the screaming crowds as uncontrolled hysteria and warned that these foreign bands were a threat to the moral fiber of America's youth. At one Stones concert at the Swing Auditorium in San Bernardino, fights broke out in the crowd, and LA politicians seized on the news. They pushed for tighter restrictions on rock shows, claiming the music was directly responsible for delinquency. But the real attempt at censorship often came behind closed doors, in meetings between city officials, police chiefs, and record distributors. Rock and roll had to pass through Los Angeles to reach the rest of the country. Pressing plants, radio syndicates, and television shows like American Bandstand's LA broadcasts made the city a bottleneck. Politicians used that to their advantage, quietly pressuring distributors not to handle obscene material. Some songs vanished from local radio not because fans didn't want them, but because a councilman or a police commissioner had made a call. The clash reached a new level when local authorities began targeting the musicians themselves. Police raided clubs on the Sunset Strip under the excuse of enforcing curfews. Bands like the Byrds and Love, who were central to LA's growing rock scene, suddenly found their shows shut down. Young fans responded with protests, carrying signs and chanting outside City Hall. That moment became known as the Sunset Strip Riots of 1966, when teenagers battled police over the right to gather, listen to music, and be young without being treated like criminals. Politicians painted it as a law and order issue. For the kids, it was about freedom, and music was at the center of it. Censorship also came through the courts. In several cases during the 1960s, Los Angeles prosecutors tried to charge record store owners for selling obscene music. They targeted albums with suggestive covers or songs with innuendo, stretching obscenity laws far beyond their original intent. The cases didn't always hold up, but the message was clear: sell the wrong kind of rock, and the city might come after you. Of course, censorship rarely works the way politicians intend. The more they tried to suppress rock, the more rebellious it became. Bands leaned into controversy, writing sharper lyrics, pushing louder sounds, and mocking the very people trying to silence them. When the city cracked down on Sunset strip clubs, it only made the strip more famous, a place teenagers wanted to be because they knew it was where authority drew the line. The harder Los Angeles officials fought, the more rock music cemented its image as the voice of rebellion. By the end of the 1960s, it was obvious that the politicians had lost the battle. Rock wasn't going away. It was bigger than ever. Festivals like Newport and Monterey Pop showed the music's cultural power. Los Angeles itself became a hub for recording, with Laurel Canyon filling up with artists who defined the era. The same city council members who once tried to censor the music now had to accept that rock had become part of Los Angeles's global identity. What started as an attempt to silence a sound had turned into proof that the city was the epicenter of cultural change. Looking back now, the censorship attempts almost feel predictable. Every generation's music has scared the generation before it. Jazz, swing, rock, hip-hop, they've all been accused of corrupting youth. But in Los Angeles in the 1960s, those fears carried real weight because the city had the political machinery to enforce them. For a few years, local politicians really believed they could police a sound, and for a few years, they made life harder for musicians, promoters, and fans. But what they couldn't stop was the feeling rock gave to kids who were tired of being told what was decent, what was proper, and what was allowed. The story of LA's attempt to censor rock is less about the success of politicians and more about the persistence of culture. No matter how many permits were denied, no matter how many radio stations got warnings, no matter how many clubs were raided, the music found a way. Kids bought bootlegs, swapped records, and turned concerts into statements of defiance. What politicians thought was a moral crusade ended up proving how powerful the music really was. They tried to control the beat of a generation and found out that it was louder than any city council, bigger than any police raid, and more enduring than any law passed at City Hall. And that's why the attempts to censor rock in Los Angeles matter. They remind us that music isn't just entertainment. It's a force that scares people in power when it challenges their control. For every politician who stood at a podium warning about the dangers of rock, there were thousands of kids turning the volume up louder, proving that once a sound takes root in the streets, there's no silencing it.